You finish a chapter, close the book, and feel a little smarter. But if someone asks you 20 minutes later what it was about, you can maybe give them the title. The rest is completely gone. In the late 1800s, a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus set out to measure this exact phenomenon. He invented lists of nonsense syllables so they wouldn't connect to anything he already knew, memorized them, and tracked how much he forgot over time. This line graph plots the data he uncovered, which was later validated by a massive 2015 replication study. It shows the trajectory of information retained over time. Notice this steep drop right here. 42% of the material is lost in the first 20 minutes. The decay continues rapidly from there. By the 1-hour mark, more than half the material has vanished. After a single day, 64% is missing, and by day 6, a full 74% has dropped out of your memory.
Closing a book and feeling like you retained nothing by lunchtime does not mean your attention span is broken. It means your brain is operating exactly on schedule. We tend to think of the brain as a hard drive, designed to store every piece of data we encounter. In reality, it operates as a highly aggressive filter, built to delete noise. Think about your daily commute home from work last year. You experienced it. Your eyes took in the road, the cars, the stoplights, but your brain dumped all of that information because none of it was necessary to keep. To your biology, passively reading a chapter of a book looks exactly the same as passively watching the highway. By default, the brain's baseline state is to clear the cache. But when we sit down to read something important, our goal is exactly the opposite. We want that information to stay. So, if the brain's primary function is to aggressively delete what we passively experience, we have to figure out how to manually trigger the biological signal that tells it to hit save. People usually fight this rapid forgetting by reading slower, or they read a chapter 3 times in a row, coding the margins in different colored highlighters. Those methods fall into a psychological trap called the illusion of competence. They make you feel highly prepared, but they leave you entirely empty-handed when someone asks you a question about the material the next day. To understand why, you have to separate 2 distinct processes going on in your brain when you study: recognition and retrieval. Recognition happens when your eyes glide across a highlighted sentence. The text feels incredibly familiar, and a part of your brain quietly agrees that you know the material. It feels exactly like learning. But the moment you close the book, recognition is useless. You now need retrieval. Retrieval is an entirely separate cognitive muscle. It is the active, effortful process of dragging information up from storage without any external clues. A 2008 study by researchers Karpicke and Roediger tested this difference perfectly. They had college students learn foreign language vocabulary. One group studied a word, got it right, and then stopped testing themselves, acting exactly like someone reading a highlighted textbook. The other group kept continuously self-testing on the words, forcing their brains to retrieve the answers over and over. This bar chart compares their retention rates 1 week later. The passive study group remembered around 30%. The continuous retrieval group remembered around 80%. Same amount of time spent on the task. Same words. Pushing information in through your eyes only triggers recognition. A lasting memory is only forged through the physical effort of pulling information out. If pulling information out is the active ingredient, the next logical question is how often you need to do it. A massive 2006 meta-analysis covering over 300 experiments gave us the answer: distributed practice. The results are incredibly consistent. Spacing out your retrieval sessions beats massed cramming by a significant margin every single time. This timeline illustrates the optimal spacing strategy. The longer you want to keep a memory, the longer the gap between review sessions should be. You start with a tight cluster of reviews early on and stretch them out to months. This brings up a heavy debate among people who read a lot. What about taking notes? Research shows that students who take handwritten notes on paper perform better on conceptual recall a week later than students who type their notes. The reason isn't magic, it's friction. Handwriting is slow. You physically cannot write down every word a lecturer says. You are forced to listen, compress the idea, and summarize it in real time. That compression is a form of active retrieval. The laptop group, unconstrained by speed, can type fast enough to capture verbatim quotes. They act like passive recording devices, pushing data onto a screen without the brain ever having to process or retrieve the meaning.
The exact same logic applies to whatever digital second brain or note-taking system you use. The specific tool doesn't matter. If your system makes it easy to passively collect data without forcing the friction of retrieval, it is just useless decoration. You do not need to build a complex spreadsheet, download a new app, or carry around stacks of flashcards to implement this science. You can capture the vast majority of the benefit with what I call the one-question rule. Every time you finish a chapter, sit there for exactly 60 seconds and answer one question in your head. What was the main idea, and how would I explain it to a friend? Integrating the spacing effect is just as easy. You do that first recall immediately after reading. You do a second touch the next morning while making coffee, asking yourself what you read. Then do a third quick sweep on the weekend, recalling the highlights of the week. That is the entire science of memory, stripped of all the tedious study plans, packaged into a daily habit that costs you a mere 4 minutes a week. There is a lingering guilt that readers carry around. We feel that if we can't quote a book verbatim, the time spent reading it was entirely wasted.
But a 2020 study tested exactly this, measuring verbatim memory against conceptual memory. The results showed that readers only retain 12 to 20% of the surface details, like specific statistics or exact phrasing, but they retain almost the entirety of the conceptual gist. Trying to remember a concept without looking at the page is going to feel awkward and slightly painful. That struggle is not a sign of failure. That friction is the exact chemical signal your brain requires to permanently lock a file into storage. Easy reading is entirely forgettable. By leaning into the brief, 60-second struggle of retrieval, you ensure the meaning of what you read actually becomes something you own.